think I was 30 at the time, I'm not sure. And I didn't know him, I didn't speak to him. They put him in on B tier in cell 10. I was in cell 11 next to him. And I didn't, I'm new, I'm scared. So that evening, a group of about six prisoners come out of their cells, and they're being led by this one prisoner who's a boxer, who was a boxer on the streets and who was in the segregation unit for killing another prisoner. Well, him and his gang were trying to get into the cell to the cell of the guy next to me, so they could break him. And you might find it strange for me to say that the guard was down at the end of the tier trying to roll the kid's door open so that this could happen. But the guards and the prisoners had a very strange relationship. From one point, throwing urine and fecal matter onto the guards, to another point where they're buddies and everything is fine and we don't want any trouble. In any case, this guard, he was a lieutenant, the last I heard, but then he was just a recruit. He's rolling the thingy to open this kid's door, and the kid is putting a book, a hard case book in the door that had bars on it in order to keep from sliding open. And then the gang of rapists would try and grab the book, and he would pull it back, and the guard would try and roll, and he'd stick the book back in there. And this was going on, and I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, I should, yell, stop you villains. But then they'll be at my cell. What am I going to, Well, the rapists go down to the end of the tier where there's a sink and get pitchers of hot water and throw it in on this guy. But that doesn't do it. The guard tires of it, and the incident is over, and I'm having a moral crisis about what should have been my role. And so the next day, we all get out on the tier, 3 at a time. There's 20 cells on the tier. We get out 3 at a time for exercise. Exercise consists of walking up and down the tier. So when I get out, some of the guys on the tier are the ones that were being brutalized as a result of the takeover of 1974, and who I helped by bombing the headquarters of the Department of Corrections. And so I'm talking to, what's this? It's just, this cannibalism. How can this be going on? And I didn't seem like I got a lot. Didn't seem like I made a lot of progress. I talked to one old guy. He said, the kid's a punk. What difference does it make? That's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. Don't get your undies in a twist. And my exercise period was over, and I went back to my cell. That evening, there was no gang. There was no nothing. But I heard that the boss rapist was getting out on the yard time as the same as the kid that was in the cell next to me. And so I got myself put on the same yard thing. Before that happened, however, the chief, there would have been a change. Remember we talked about a change of consciousness in the state of Washington as a result of the strike? Well, unbeknownst to me, there had been a change of consciousness on the tier. And that, the rape was no longer okay. And evidently this guy, is aware of this. I wasn't really aware of it. And he came in front of my cell during his exercise time, and he's jumping rope, looking straight in at me through the bars, jumping rope. He's a boxer, so he's doing right on the back down. I can't do it right. But he's, just, professionally doing this jump rope thing. So when it was my time to come out of my cell, I got to jump rope, and I got in front of his cell, and looked at him, but I'm clumsy and I'm, you know, and all I'm trying to say is, you know, you might kill me or whatever you're going to do, but it's, you know, it's going to be, you know, I'm not going to roll over on you. You know, I'm not going to make it easy. So then he gets on the kids' exercise period. I put myself on the kids' exercise period. That night I don't sleep at all. I'm just convinced that if I'm not dead tomorrow, I'm going to be badly maimed. Because, I mean, I am no match for you. I'm not. There's tough guys in prison, and I know what they are, and I'm not one. So, I get out on the tier, ready for, you know, whatever's going to happen to me, and nothing happens. I go back into my cell, and this guy transfers to another tier. Two of his henchmen follow within a day, and because he's lost face, they pretend like they're blowing him a nose hit in his cell, and they pull out knives and start stabbing him. He takes the knives away from these guys and chases them off the tier. That's, you know, when I say this guy's pretty tough. But it was this experience that caused me to think about, and the culture of that place, that caused me to think about the need for something like Men Against Sexism. That at different prisons, there's different ways to establish your place in the pecking order. One prison, Brushy Mountain Prison in Tennessee, it was the tough guys ran poker tables, and the really tough guys robbed those poker tables. Or it could be something as simple as at Marion, they issue boxer shorts, and so having a pair of briefs made you cool. Or, I guess they call them wife beaters nowadays, as opposed to a regular t-shirt. The little things that, you know, set up who you are. Now, Walla Walla, it was by raping vulnerable prisoners. You established yourself as one of the, you know, as high up on the pecking order. And so that needed to change. So there were 6 of us that we called ourselves the Walla Walla Brothers, and when we got out of the segregation unit, we organized a group called Men Against Sexism. And we put out a small, when Mark was in Walla Walla, he put out a little underground newspaper called The Bomb. Men Against Sexism, we put out a little newspaper called The Lady Finger. And we screened films on like men and masculinity. But mostly what we did is there was a lot of robbery. If the commissary shack was located out in the yard, and when the elderly were walking back to their cells with their commissary, they would get robbed. We would escort them and prevent that from happening. When somebody was latched onto and bought, we would pull them out of that cell and put them in a safe cell and face a lot of retribution, a lot of, you know, anger as a result of our doing. You know, this guy's a fucking child molester. What are you doing sticking up for him? You know, and that kind of thing. And so we had ultimately with governments, or even with something as simple as Men Against Sexism, if you take a piece of 3/4 inch pipe and a piece of 5/8 inch pipe and a nipple on the larger piece of pipe with a hole drilled in it and a PK screw, self-tapping screw, you have a 410 shotgun shell will fit fine into the smaller piece of pipe, and you just slide it like that and you have a single shot shotgun. We had a pistol with 80 rounds of ammunition, and I had made 3 homemade hand grenades. So we were ready to back up. That, you know, that the prisoner-on-prisoner rape and the buying and selling of prisoners was going to stop. It was not going to happen. ultimately, the administration, and this is back in the mid-70s, the administration gave us an air-conditioned office, Men Against Sexism. We had sewing machines donated by the outside community. Our members would sew, would make clothing or repair clothing and stuff like that. At one point, the Chicano Club latched on to one of the gay prisoners. She was really beautiful, really beautiful. And she was in a relationship with somebody that she loved. He wasn't tough. He was, you know, they just hit it off. And the Chicanos grabbed her up and to make her their sex slave in the Chicano Club. And she wasn't even a member of Men Against Sexism. So word reached us. We said, we called an emergency. Well, we also brought in the Metropolitan Community Church over the objections of the homophobic pastor at the time. And Men Against Sexism did a whole lot of things. Anyway, so the Chicano Club has this woman, and word reaches us to do something. So the six of us, the core group, says, okay, well, let's do it. And so we call an emergency meeting of all the queers and tell them what the situation is and tell them that we're going to go in there and deal with it. Doyle Turner, his name is Blue, had already talked to the Chicanos that, you know, he was one of our members, you know, don't do this. And they told him to go fuck himself. So we took our weapons and said, okay, the rest of Men Against Sexism does not know what we're about to do. They just know that we're going in to try and resolve this thing. So what we had decided is that we're going to go in and free this woman, and we're going to make a message. We're going to write in blood that this is not, or we're not going to tolerate, that this is not going to happen, that that's that. We're ready to march in there with our shotguns and our pistol and our grenades, and Blue says, let me go talk to him once more. And we said, okay, be quick. He came back with her and said it's over. I don't know what he told him. I never asked him what he told him, but that was Men Against Sexism. Thank you. Yes?
Would either of you ruminate on the phrase, the rise of the prison industrial complex, and how it might affect who gets put in?
The rise of the prison industrial complex?
Yeah, I mean, the private agencies building prisons, you know.
Well, it goes before the private enterprise took over from Wall Street. They were doing it back in the early 1900s, 30s. You heard of Parchment Farm? They'd use prisoners to go out and do work for private landowners that wouldn't pay them. They could get away with that was slavery. In Walla Walla, they used to take prisoners out of Walla Walla and take them across the border into Oregon. Well, they did it in Washington too, Oregon, and sometimes Idaho to do farm work. These are private owners. Somebody saw it was lucrative business, but they had to do it legally. And there's a book called Selling of America. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's by Paul Wright, and I think Dan Burton wrote that.
Dan Pins.
Dan Pins. And it explains the different companies and how they work, how they make money, how they sell the stock on the stock market. In other words, actually selling prisoners. It's not all that complicated. It's been running for a long time. But the prison industrial complex goes beyond that. They make prisons. They make prefabricated prisons, prefabricated gun towers. They're just in the business making prisons, and they want crime to continue, and they want crime to be made up, because the more prisons there are, the more money they can make. And it's spreading across the world. It's not just here in the United States. It's starting to spread across the world, these private prisons. Privatization of government has kind of influenced it. We've already seen the privatization of schools. That happened a long time ago. They were private schools before they were public schools. But the public schools, in a sense, were for the agricultural business. Is to keep the kids busy while the adults were working, and then let them out during harvest time. Remember, that's a summer vacation, the harvest of lands. But that's where big business, in a sense, directed how the schools were to be run. The guy, Horace Mann, I think it was, who started the public schools, he didn't have that in mind when he started public schools. But people take advantage of things that look good. When private business saw Parkman Farm, they knew they could do, in a sense, do a better job. We were talking to a youngster recently who was in the what's it called, Immigration Detention Center. And he said that the conditions in there, it's run by private prisons, by the way. And they do work, and they're supposed to pay the inmates or the prisoners $1 a day. This is $1 a day. But these businesses have figured out these are people that are going to be deported, so we'll withhold their wages. And if they get deported, we don't have to pay them nothing. So one of the prisoners decided to protest, go on hunger strike, go on a work strike. Want to encourage people to go on a work strike to stop this, and they put him in solitary confinement. There's a fight going on constantly inside of these places. Prisoners doing the fight, and people outside not really knowing what's going on. That our tax money is paying those private businesses to run private prisons. The various states have made contracts with these people saying, we'll give you, say, 1,000 prisoners, not less, but 1,000 prisoners if you handle them for us. They say, yeah. But if they go under that 1,000, then the private business, they're out of business. They can't handle good at all. So it's kind of a complex thing, but if you ever get a chance to read The Selling of America, that'll give you a good picture. It's a fairly old book. It's about 10 years old now. But it's the only one I know that really deals with it from the perspective of prisoners who wrote the book.
Another thing that people need to remember is that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery for everyone, except those convicted of a crime. So we have 2.3 million slaves in the United States. We have, those people are held in conditions of irresponsibility and dependency, in conditions that it would be illegal to house another kind of primate in. And so the message that people need to understand is that slavery still exists in America, and that there needs to be a struggle to abolish slavery once and for all, because according to Governor Schwarzenegger, when he was governor of California, the recidivism rate in California is 70%. I think it's something similar here. You don't get good things as a result of doing bad things to people. We should be working to extend democracy to all, and that means that even prisoners have the right to vote, to participate in civic affairs, to help them develop responsibility and be more empowered. And if the question is posed right, I don't think that there's a lot of people who are going to come out and say, well, I'm for slavery, and I'm for not extending democracy to everyone. I don't think everybody should have democracy. I don't believe in freedom for all. And so those are some kind of guidelines that things that can be changed within the context. Yes.
I was kind of wondering, you talk a lot about the past, like in life and the past, but where do you guys see the future as far as like prison system goes?
I can't hear you.
How do you see the future for like prison system, and how should we influence that? How can we influence that in a way that's beneficial?
Yeah. He says he wants a like to know how we see the future of prison systems are going to go. It depends a great deal on the prisoners themselves. Prisoners have to stand up and be recognized. You know, they know what the conditions are. They're living under those conditions, and they have various ways to demonstrate their dislike of what's going on. The hunger strike was one way. The California prisons have 120,000 prisoners in it, but they were able, on a third hunger strike, to raise 60 prisoners supporting it, 60,000 prisoners, 30,000, excuse me, 30,000 prisoners supporting the hunger strike. It's out about.
Let me finish this off. People have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you're convicted of a crime, you lose the liberty. That does not mean you need to be housed like some kind of an animal. Why can't you have an area with sufficient space to live? Why can't you have a computer? Why can't you be held in conditions that reflect your status as a human being?
He wants to know what's the future, though.
That is the future.
A prison is going to stay that way? Oh yeah, we'd like to see it that way. And one more thing, I'd like to distinguish the felon prisoners from the detainees. The detainees are prisoners. Okay, they are rising up themselves, and then, you know, and they're trying to get help from people outside to understand the conditions they're living under. None of them really should be locked up to start off with. If you're a detainer, you're supposed to show up in court. If you don't show up in court, then they can lock you up, maybe kind of like a bail thing. But they got detainees locked up all over the United States, and it doesn't need to be done. And then they're working in these private prisons like they are slaves. Okay, the Constitution refers to convicted people as being slaves. Federal government has gone further than that and allowed private prisons to use non-convicted people as slaves. And, yeah.
I was wondering, I can't remember which book it was in, either Creating a Movement with Teeth or Guerrilla USA, but in one of them it referenced that some of the people in George Jackson Brigade took the position that it was the responsible thing to do for men to engage with homosexuality because of like the inherent patriarchal behaviors that would emerge if men and women had sex, that there would be like,
To allow women to develop their strength and not have it trained off by men, yes.
So
And
I was wondering if you
because,
could speak to that.
huh?
If you could speak to that a little bit.
Suck a dick for the revolution. Sexism is quite alive and well, even among our most progressive elements. And generally, I don't touch on the cultural aspect of revolution because people have regressed a long ways from where they were 40 years ago. But that was a controversial position during its day, and a controversial position among heterosexual men today. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I was just wondering if you could talk about it. I didn't really have a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else? You gonna let us off that easy? Go for it.
How do you see the police force now as moving toward more of a counterinsurgency set of tactics than just a direct oppressive set of tactics? Do you actually see that occurring, or do you see? I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's talk that using the police force in a more counterinsurgency ideal, as in building legitimacy for police force and being more interactive with the community, do you see that as more helpful or more destructive to
police force has kind of lost its duty to, protect and serve, so to speak, just enforce the law. There was times when they were not armed. Then they were given a pistol. Then they were given riot guns, and now they're armed as well as any military person. Militarized. When things got tough, they're supposed to call in the National Guard to help them. But the federal government has taken the National Guard and turned them into their military now. And they also use them as police when the time comes. But when they use them as police, they bring in military equipment, half-tracks and tanks. We saw this in Seattle when they moved against the Panthers. This is something that's evolving into a nightmare, that the police force, which puts more risk on anybody who wants to stand up to have things changed. We'll do the best we can with our voting franchise, but a lot more needs to be done. And it's going to be a harder job for people of the younger generation and the generation coming after you to fight revolutions, because the government's becoming more sophisticated, and it's hard for the common people to keep up with it. The only way we can keep up with it is we have to design the stuff that they actually use. And we are doing that now. There's nothing the government has that youth has not designed for them.
I don't know if that answers the question. I didn't really understand the question. But it's something about the police. And I guess it depends on what community you're from. If you're from the Central District in Seattle, your relationship with the police is a lot different than if you're interacting with the police from the ritzy Laurelhurst neighborhood of Seattle. So it's a class thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the response I got was pretty close. It wasn't so much a question, just as an observation as you saw it.
Okay, let's wrap this sucker up. There's two publications up there. There's a quarterly called Prison Focus that I've been the editor of for the last 13 years. It goes mainly to California prisoners. It has a print run of between 7,000 and 3,000, depending on how much money we have. And there is also a monthly newsletter up there called Rock that Mark and I put out. We're in our third year of publication. That goes primarily to shoe prisoners in California. So they're all free. So feel free to help yourself to whatever you like on the way out.
Segregated housing unit.
I have a follow-up question if no one else has one.
Good.
There's been a lot of concern, certainly in the radical community, about security culture, about being infiltrated, about snitches. I've even published articles characterizing it in some instances as hysteria as kind of point where it's like a modern snitch hunts. You guys have done time, and I've looked at this, and it seems, would you agree that the majority of people that are threatened, certainly in the federal system, which is like based on this, I mean, if you don't snitch, then, they're really going to give you, the maximum amount of time, that snitching has almost become common, like maybe more a nation